was a past president of Montgomery Potters and is one of the Montgomery Potters is one of the co-sponsors of the Inspired by Malcolm exhibit. And Robin has been a very important coordinator for the show and has done a lot of work setting up the exhibit. So I'll turn it over to
Daria. That sounds great. I just want to also mention the other co-sponsors, which are Judy Davis, wife and longtime partner of Malcolm, and she's been the soul and the start of the entire exhibit and all of these events. And other co-sponsors are Baltimore Clay Works, District Clay, and the Clay Co-op in Rockville. So we thank all of our co-sponsors as we thank all of the exhibitors and everybody else participating. I'm going to just introduce the panel and then turn it over to them. So let me just say Kevin Crowe works in the Blue Ridge foothills where he lives with his wife, Linda. His sons Bram and Kai also live in Nelson County, and Kevin produces wood-fired functional stoneware with strong Asian and English roots. He talks about the elastic language of clay. His work ranges from 4-inch tea bowls to 48-inch vases, and Kevin's pots are fired in a 450 cubic foot anagama. Firings last 7 days, consuming 8 cords of wood and firing 1,500 to 2,000 pots. And the kiln is fired twice a year when the moon is right and it's not soccer season. So John Jessamine is the Cub Creek Foundation founder and director. And you can see everybody's name at the bottom of their face. As a student at Alfred, John worked as Val Cushing's studio assistant. He taught ceramics in New York State for 33 years, but the seeds of Cub Creek were sown in 1976 when he taught a summer program at Archie Bray Foundation. There he had a small group of highly talented and committed students that in a short time, with intensive work, made great progress. And this became the vision for Cub Creek. While Cub Creek provides workshops and other creative programs, the central focus is assisting resident emerging artists in the development of their careers. The Cub Creek studios are open 24/7, allowing the residents to fully immerse in their development. Lauren Sherback discovered clay in high school and earned a BA in printmaking and ceramics in 1979 from Alfred University. She is committed to minimizing her environmental footprint by reducing the use of harmful chemicals, and she uses local clays and wood, iron oxide as the colorant, and an energy-efficient wood-fueled kiln to create her surfaces, colors, and textures. The scale and intimacy of her forms, the use of local flora directly as tools for drawing, and her printmaking sensibility communicate her love of nature and its enduring strength, opposing the suburban development conspiring against it. Jim Dugan and his wife Shannon have joined with owner Marcia Mason to ignite the flames of the 3-chambered Naboragama and Manabagama wood kilns at Monocacy River Pottery. Jim is well known locally for his decade as wood-fired kiln master and a resident artist at Baltimore Clay Works. And he is experienced with firing, building, and repairing wood kilns, soda kilns, and gas kilns. Prior to his work in Baltimore, he was a studio manager and outreach coordinator at Touchstone Center for Crafts in Farmington, Pennsylvania. And he worked for 5 years as the studio manager and head technician at Vermont Clay Studio in Waterbury Center, Vermont. Jim has focused on wheel-thrown and wood-fired functional pottery. Jim is interested in exploring the possibilities of clay forms from tiny shot cups to oversized bowls, vases, and platters while maintaining the functional necessities. And Joe Hicks is an associate professor of fine art at Marymount University. Hired at Marymount in 2013 to develop a ceramics program for the Department of Fine Arts, he has built up a program from 2 introductory ceramic courses to an entire curriculum for achieving a minor in ceramics. Course offerings range from wheel throwing, mold making and slip casting to 3D printing and prototyping and glaze chemistry. In his personal work, Joe presents vessels as evidence of persistent inquiry and the development of new aesthetic principles and processes through investigating the relationships involving the physical nature of clay materials, form and compositional design, and the ceramic process. He offers workshops with carbon trap Shino that include the history, the chemistry of, and the firing methodology for achieving the desired Shino results. Joe will be our panel moderator, and I turn it over to Joe. Thank you, all of you.
Okay, thanks, Robin. I really appreciate that introduction. And thanks for all the artists, Lauren, Jim, John, and Kevin, for being here. I'm really excited to have the discussion. And I just want to know before we begin, John can hear me? I'm not sure. Okay.
I don't think he can hear you, but he has the subscript.
Oh, okay, great. Because I just needed to know I'm beginning with John. So I wanted to make sure that he was able to participate. Yeah, so again, I want to thank Robin and Sandy Spring Museum for this amazing opportunity and organizing this fantastic exhibition. It's really great. I strongly urge all of you, if you're in the neighborhood, to go to Sandy Spring Museum and check it out. There's a really wide variety of Shino surfaces, and I think everyone who goes, the quality is a really high standard as well. So I'm just really excited to be a part of this, and I won't delay any further. I know we've been kind of waiting. So I guess the way that I'd like to do this is I have a couple of topics. So I want to try and focus on and bring out some of the history of how Shino was developed in Japan and how perhaps it came over to American pottery studios. And then, for the last hour, I want to spend a lot of time on, what an American Shino is, and trying to understand with the panelists their processes, their aesthetics. And at that part of the conversation, I'm definitely going to be looking in the chat, looking for questions. So if the audience has questions, just plug them in there, and I'll do my best to try and incorporate it into the discussion. While we're talking, I might address a particular artist, but this should be really free flowing. So if you all have an idea about how, to contribute to the conversation, then you should just chime in. And that's to the panelists, of course. So I wanted to start with a really quick slideshow. Can I share my screen real quick? I'm going to be very, 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 very brief. Because we've already lost some time, but I thought it was important to kind of start with just a really quick historical perspective for people who might not be that familiar, because some of the questions I'll set up are derived from these types of ideas. So originally, it's important to understand, the period of Japanese history, and I'm still learning about this myself, of course. But the Shino glazes were most popular during the Momoyama period, which is late 15th century, early 1600s. And this was a period of time that was dominated by warring kind of lords, like military leadership. And there was also becoming consolidated. So they were being consolidated under a particular person, Oda Nobunaga. And he is a particularly important person because the idea of the tea ceremony and ceramic objects were extremely important to Japanese society. And a lot of times these objects were so important that they became treasured, especially with this class of people, with this high level of social class and political class. Here we go. Okay. His particular area of where he began to consolidate, and it was slowly consolidated with his subsequent leaders after his death in central Japan. And this becomes important because Shino was said to be developed in the Mino area. And this is the area right here. And this was kind of his backyard. So he definitely had, helped appropriate funds and helped appropriate space for ceramic production to continue in that area of Japan. So it's really important to kind of understand that. Also, the tea ceremony and Buddhism were really especially influential in developing ideas and philosophy related to artistic expression in Japan. So the tea masters of the time were extremely influential because they also appropriated funds to the kiln sites that would develop the characteristics. So under their direction, the characteristics of Shino began to become commonplace. And it was also inspired by the wabi-sabi style philosophy of Buddhism, where you then begin to get these, it was more of a focus on, the rustic and simplicity of Japanese society. The most influential tea master was definitely Furuta Uribe, and his name is very important. He's definitely named for the glaze that we know today, which is the green feldspathic glaze. Under his direction, a lot of Shino wares were developed, and until well, let me just back up. Sorry. The Ogama kilns, these are the kilns that this particular period of Japanese pottery were fired in. You can see they're kind of a really simple and kind of inefficient kiln, and it kind of created these environments for these really super long reductive firings, which really helped the Shinos and those types of surfaces kind of develop. So these are actual examples of Shino ware from the Momoyama period. And I thought it was important to go through and give you the opportunity to see where this had all began. And then how it's kind of manifested, not only by Japanese artists in the 20th century, but then adopted by American potters in the 20th and 21st century. And this is a different type of Shino called a gray Shino, where they'd apply an iron wash underneath the white feldspathic glaze, and then they were fired and they created kind of this different hue. This is referred to as a picture Shino, where it was basically a white glaze, and with these pictures, and a lot of these dishes were used in a tea ceremony as well to serve food. Here is when Shino kind of met its demise with the inclusion of the Noborigama in the early 1600s. They were able to achieve a higher temperature, and also under the aesthetic direction of Furuta Uribe, they began using these kind of green and copper glazes. So that's where the lineage of that glaze kind of comes from. And Shino was somewhat lost until the resurrection of artists like Arakawa Toyozo and Kato Hajime. Arakawa, for certain, is responsible for a lot of the rejuvenation of Shinos at the time. And these are examples of their work. And I think it's important to kind of look at these and understand what these pots are, so that you can probably better translate what we're doing as Americans here right now. Okay, and that's it. So thanks for bearing with me there. I will stop sharing my screen. And, I thought it was important to start with that because, my first questions are kind of dealing with, the historical perspective and how the panelists are working today. And I hopefully John can hear me. If you can't, then I have a question for Kevin that I can move right into. But I'll start. So the designs and aesthetics of vessels throughout history have been driven by utility and philosophy, and most directly, the tea ceremony and Buddhism were central to the development of Shino in Japan. Most of you create tea drinking vessels, which is an interesting parallel to the Japanese society and the development of Shino. John, you directly referenced mysticism and the tea ceremony in your artist statement, and I'll quote, "I'm interested in the ceramic process as a means to manifest ideas, create form, and to invest work with energy, mystery, and intrigue. In earlier ages, the vessel was seen as less autonomous and embodied magic and mysticism and religion. The early works of the Bizen Potters, native peoples, 15th, 16th century Japanese, as well as many great contemporary artists, have been an unending source of enrichment. The encrusted surfaces that embodied unknown symbolic reference, the works of the tea ceremony," unquote. So we know that the tea ceremony and Buddhism were extremely influential in the development of Shino and the wabi-sabi style of vessel making leading up to and during the Momoyama. These characteristics led to what's considered by Japanese scholars as the first real embodiment of Japanese aesthetic and artistic identity. These ideas of mysticism, religion, and tea ceremony that you mentioned are symbiotic with this period of Japanese philosophy, society, and creativity. You make tea vessels with Shino. The Cub Creek Foundation uses an anagama. So there are many similarities in philosophy and method between your process and the Japanese potters of the Momoyama. And I was hoping you could start us off by speaking more about these relationships you have with Japanese pottery from this time period and how these relationships may affect your process and choices while making your work. And we'll just give him a moment. Can you have him unmute?
But are you hearing me? Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me start by, that was a really great presentation, Joe. I mean, because it covers so much of the history, the ancient history of the tea bowl and the Shino. It was the beginning of the tea ceremony, and ceramics actually played an incredible part in the tea ceremony and gave vitality to it. And it is interesting, though, to know that when we talk about Shinos in the modern term, they are totally unlike anything that was done in the late mid-1500s and into the 1600s. And it wasn't until Kato and Arakawa began to look at shards from the Momoya period and began to reinvest in those that glaze that we began the modern era of the Shino glaze. The Shino glaze, it is believed, was not used after the early 1600s because the kilns were getting more refined and firing at higher temperatures. It's also interesting for everyone to know that the original Shinos of the Momoyama period were only fired to cone 4 and 6 because that is the level that those kilns were capable of achieving. I worked for Dan Rhodes years ago, back in the early 60s, rebuilding and building his kiln. Dan had the great privilege of being in Japan right after World War II and was able to buy ancient medieval pottery. Almost anything was available. Japan was in such a bad financial state. Things that Dan had in his collection today, you would not be able to leave out of Japan. And that was the first time I saw those Shino glazes. And the early Shino glazes weren't like what we use today for the most part. They were big, fatty, white glazes. And that's probably because of the temperatures that they were fired to. But they were beautiful. They were absolutely exquisite. And then, of course, when we get into the medieval period and the later period, where kilns became much more refined, much more developed, and capable of going to much higher temperatures, the Shino glaze changed greatly. Kato and Arakawa were notable in bringing those glazes into the modern era. And I think you covered that beautifully. And I think the drawing you presented of the old kilns would give an indication. Those kilns were like tunnels dug into hillsides. They weren't capable of what we fire today. My anagama will go to cone 12 with ease, and as will my Nobaragama. All of the glazes that we use, and of course Malcolm brought the first American Shinos were done by Warren McKenzie and Virginia Wirt. And they were creating Virginia evidently had spent time in Japan and had seen a lot of the old Shinos and wanted to bring that, and they started adding American materials. Materials are available in America, in our country, to the development of a new type of Shino. If you understand, the old Shinos in Mino were only based on native feldspar. They were almost pure feldspar, not pure, but almost pure. And they brought a whole new direction. In 1976, I was on my way to teach a summer program at Archie Bray Foundation. And on my way out there, I talked to Ken Ferguson, had asked me to run that program. And he told me that they were playing with feldspar, with Shinos there. And I said, well, how are you developing them? And he's, oh, they're just almost all feldspar. And he just left it at that. But when I got to Archie Bray, I started playing with them in 1976 on my own. And I have one sitting on my table right now in front of me. One of the tests I ran, and it was really fascinating. And I was just using what was in their glaze area. The Virginia Wirt brought spodumene and soda ash into the complex, materials that were not available in Japan in the medieval period. So it began a whole new dimension. And then, of course, Malcolm brought in high levels of soda ash and developed the beautiful black carbon trapping. And he was the master of that. So, I mean, I'm not sure how much more you want me to say, but I think what we're experiencing today with the variety of materials and the way we fire with gas. There are people who fire Shinos in electric kilns, and I fire in wood, I fire in soda, and they're so different. All of these different types of firings bring a new dimension to what that ancient glaze was. And I'll yield.
Yeah, thanks, John. And you've answered already so many questions that I had for you. And for Kevin and Lauren about how Shino developed in America, because there's like some missing documentation there. And I want to take the opportunity to use this forum to, kind of document your testimony. And so I'm definitely going to be focusing in on that a little bit later. I don't know if, Lauren or Jim or Kevin, if you had something to add to that discussion as far as like the importance of that history, the importance of, the vessel with utility, and perhaps how they translate into American style Shinos.
I think John did a great job of covering that. I don't have any details to add to that, but for those of you who on the panel who got an email from Joe describing the prompts and topics he'd like to cover, when he says it was a quick sketch, he could run a semester's course in what he had in mind, and all of us would sign up for it. It would take another month of this Zoom to scratch the surface, and that's what we'll do tonight.
Yeah, I totally agree. I spent like the last few days editing this down so that we could cover topics that are interesting enough with only the time frame we have, and I totally agree. And maybe we can do that. Actually, Kevin, I would like to continue with you. Let me find my place here. I personally feel that many of the vessels we make are a direct result of our own tendencies and rituals centered around consumption and nourishment. Kevin, you have a tradition of drinking tea, and if I recall correctly from the documentary Out of the Fire, which follows your production and firing process, as well as the community of potters you work with, you seem to have a consistent ritual of tea consumption with present guests, especially during the firing period. Could you discuss the importance of your own tea traditions, how that affects the production and firing of your tea vessels, and if you have any specific references or influence of Japanese pottery techniques or from the history of Japanese tea ceremony that you use in your work?
That's a pretty dense question.
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot to unpack there.
My earliest inspiration with Shino and with teaware in general is Toyoza Arakawa's work, which just sort of took my breath away. And in my 20s, that was easy to do. And I was already pretty committed to a sense of ritual in life, of moving from one space in your relationship to time and events to another. And in that space between is sort of a sacred space that I found tea ceremony filled elegantly. And so being a Virginian, there's been a tradition of tea, iced and hot. It's always been incorporated in our lives. And I find with my apprentices for years, about midday, 2:30 in the afternoon, we stop and we have tea. And one of the great advantages of a tea bowl is you have to hold it in your hands. So you hold it until it's warm, cool enough to drink. And in that pause, that space between the cooling and the drinking, there's a possibility of relationship to get perspective on, in my case, what the apprentices and myself have done during the day. For other people, whether they're going to buy the house or get divorced or have kids, it's that special space in between that tea gives us this opportunity to create a sacred space around the decision-making and experience we're having with life. And in the relationship here to people dropping by and visiting, I'm sure everybody that has a studio, early on, you're considered a guy that doesn't, or a woman who doesn't really have to work for a living. So people would drop by to say hi frequently, and we'd bring out a teapot. And it defines the relationship of that visit, that experience. The tea, you pour it, you brew it, you wait for it to cool, drink a cup of tea, and then without being rude and appreciating the fact they stopped by, it's over. It's time for me to get back to work. And that's a ritual that I've seen my sons in their adult life also incorporate. It's just a beautiful way of defining a relationship to somebody, respecting the fact that there is a relationship, and also the fact that we're at work.
Yeah, and I like how, I'm interested too in how that ritual kind of creates a space for us to slow down and actually contemplate our ideas. I find that sometimes I get so busy that time is usually in the middle of the night and I can't sleep. And so, I think we could all probably speak to that. And I don't know if Jim and Lauren have an experience that, they might want to share as far as being ritualistic with your utilitarian vessels. But I find it fantastic that, as a potter myself, I can make these pots. And not only is my hard work, part of that experience, but I get to share not only my work and my ideas and my thoughts and my calmness with my friends and those who come by and visit. So I find I have a really great response and relationship with your description. Does, Jim and Lauren, do you have an experience like that you could share with us?
Well, for me, I'm a lot more of a coffee drinker, to be honest, but we do have, cupboards full of mugs in particular, so personal with the people that we know. And, I find every morning or most mornings, I reach for a particular mug, and I definitely think about that person and the relationships that we have and all the things we may have shared together. So yeah, definitely in that sense.
I don't have much to add because I'm kind of coming to Shino as a medium for expression. So it's always amazing to me that people that I make I do care about function, but I want basically the art to be interacting with people in their daily lives. So it's always amazing to me that you have such an intimate object that you make that's a little art capsule of the world. You know, I mean, it's like taking your sense of the world and you handing it to somebody else, and they have a moment with you and a moment with their lives, and hopefully it expands both of our time together. You know, abstractly, as an artist, this is what I'm trying for. And you know, back to the history, it's very interesting. You kind of prompted me to think about my own personal history, and my sister helped build the clay department at our high school. I'm a baby in the family. She was the first potter, and Eric Madsen at this local high school, for those local people at Walter Johnson, taught from scratch. I mean, we didn't have bottles of glaze and stuff. So by the time I came along, my sister had built the clay department and built the independent study department. So I had like, the way to make pots all the time. You know, it was great. So I was thinking back, we didn't do Shino then, and I graduated high school in '73 and then went on to Montgomery College. By the time I did at Montgomery College, they had Shino in buckets. So by the mid '70s, it was already ubiquitous, right? And we had an updraft gas kiln. And I still have the piece from that time. I just was so taken with the surface, even though I wasn't getting the reduction that Malcolm got, because, you know, it was like the tool couldn't do it. And, it's then on to Alfred. And by the time I hit Alfred, Shino, Malcolm's glazes were in buckets. So it's just crazy how fast the word spreads when you have something that's like as seductive as Shino was for all of us. That's all I have.
And maybe we'll just move on to discuss a little bit more about that topic, because you and John were both really hinting at your experience and the transition and integration of Shino into the studio diaspora here in America. And I have some notes, and I just, John was talking about World War II. That's really important. So I would have to say, like, the four things that coincide at the right stage for me, from my observations for the influence of Japanese style techniques and philosophy to take hold in America, which would have led to the introduction and the adoption of Shino glazes. One would have been, again, the American exposure to Asian cultures since the mid-1800s, including craftsmen and artist exchanges between Japan and America. And also the introduction to Asian culture from veterans of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Also, I think this is really important too, the returning GI's experience of accessing university education through the GI Bill, most notably from World War II, which coincided with an explosion in expanding art and ceramic programs in the university system during the 50s. Also, that particular generation's influence on education of subsequent American ceramic artists and potters, most notably Warren McKenzie, as related to the introduction and development of Shino in America. And we all know that Warren led his students to develop American style recipes, as John has mentioned. And, the list goes on, Randy Johnson, Virginia Wirt, and then how Virginia Wirt passed that on to Malcolm Davis to develop carbon trap Shinos, right? And then also, I'd like to point out the influence of Bernard Leach and Hamada on American potters and their association with Warren McKenzie hosting their infamous American tour in the early 50s. And let's not to mention all of the other publications and books featuring Japanese style ceramics that served as an inspiration to American potters, including Daniel Rhodes, Nelson, and Bernard Leach, of course. And as you were mentioned, and I think because Jim and I are both similar, I think we're both similar in age.
Yeah, I was going to say we kind of come into the sort of next generation.
Yeah.
I'm having a bit of difficulty following the text here, but anyway, I think getting back to the Shino glaze itself, I think so many of us have been greatly influenced by the Asian, especially the Japanese influence on the Shino and the tea bowls and ceramic art in general. But there's also a point that I'd like to point out, that none of us are actually Japanese. And there's a big difference in my mind between influence and imitation. And I try to stress that so much with the kids that come down here to work with me. I had a great friendship with Peter Volkas for many, many years. I met him for the first time in '67 out in California. And I got back to my studio and I was so taken with the work he was doing. I spent a whole week making Peter Volkas pots. But you know, I never put my name on them and I never fired him. I wanted to learn about how he approached clay. And to me, that's a valid thing to do. But, you know, because I was taken by them and I wanted to be influenced by them. And the same was true when I saw those great pots of Rosanjan at Alfred. That was some of the first Japanese wood-fired pots I had ever seen in 62 actually. Val Cushing took me into the glory hole at Alfred and we walked, I mean, this was a room filled with amazing works from all the past residents, past students, all the famous artists. There's Bernard Leach, there's Hamada, there's all of the great potters of the contemporary world. And Val at the end asked me, after about 30 minutes, he said, well, what was resonating with you? And for some reason, I went to the Rosanjan pots and I couldn't, and Val said, what is it about them that you're taken by? And I couldn't answer him. And years later, I came to understand that because I started my career as a painter in art school. And I loved Robert Motherwell and Franz Klein and the de Koonings and Joan Mitchell and all those great painters. And all of a sudden I saw those Rosanjan pots and I realized that my fascination with them was because of abstract expressionism. And we were taught for many, many years, early in the 50s and 60s, that abstract expressionism was invented in America. It wasn't. It was present in Japan in the Middle Ages, in the medieval period. But it was in clay. And that was what I felt drew me to those great Rosanjan pieces and those wonderful tea bowls and water jars at Dan Rhodes. Dan Rhodes, when I was helping him build his kiln, brought a water jar to the table. And it had deep cracks in it that would never have held water. And he said, this is one of the most treasured pieces from the firing. And I'm a country farm boy, and I know when we got a pail that leaks, we throw it out. But they thought that was the most treasured piece of the firing, and I couldn't understand it. And Dan said, yeah, it was because the kiln had an impact on it. He said there were probably hundreds of water jars for the tea ceremony in these hillside kilns that worked functionally well. But this one was the part that the kiln changed, and this was their treasure. And it was like an eye-opening experience for me, you know, and it began to put things, the things that I loved about those medieval pots into context. Anyway, I'll yield. I'm having a hard time keeping up with the writings here. So anyway.
I'll try to slow down.
I want to comment. I just that you the business about the war years and the Vietnam, the vets that came home and the way they thought is a huge influence on our art, American art. Okay, in the case of me, I was influenced by family friends who were right there after the war, after the bomb was dropped in Japan, to help build up the labor unions after the war. They collected, the woman went on these foreign service trips into the countryside and met Hamada and developed a huge friendship with him and collected his work long before he was a National Living Treasure. It was the war experience that enabled these people to bring home these examples. And I, here in Bethesda, in Rockville, Maryland, I was able to handle these pieces and live with them, you know, eat off them and live with them and start to kind of, clay has this amazing ability
I am on this.
To communicate the people, human experience from one generation to another. So anyway, the Barati collection, if anybody cares, is given to the Sackler Museum, so you can go see their collection. But then when I was in school at Alfred, they were Vietnam vets that were there. So on the GI Bill, they were able to go to art school, which they couldn't have even fathomed before they went off to war. So they came back and they had this like amazing ability to abstract, to look at abstractions and see the, you know, life in a, as Jim says, as John says, a more mystical. They really started to see life in a valuable way that they communicated through their art. And this is who we were taught by, either World War II or Vietnam vets or even people that studied from all of them.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. That generation of potters, you know, is extremely influential, including for John and Kevin, I would imagine. And I have a specific question for Jim in a minute about like new dissemination of information, but I'd really like to try and capture Kevin's experience and your testimony, if possible, of you know, your experience with coming, you know, being introduced to Shino and how you acquired that.
Can I jump in just a second?
Yeah, sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I have one of the residents just came in here and said that you guys are muting me. I'm being muted by your program. One of the residents just told me.
John, I
don't know. And anyway.
Sorry, I had muted you because Lauren was speaking and you and...
Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, you and the resident were speaking to each other, so I was just muting you temporarily. But that, you can always unmute yourself with the mute button at the bottom corner. It should look like an icon with a microphone.
Okay, are we able to continue? All right. Kevin, would you mind stepping in and maybe perhaps offering your experience? We'd really appreciate that.
All right.
My experience with Shino was, as I said earlier, linked to my experience with Arakawa's tea bowls and the tea ceremony. And I wasn't as interested in the composition and manipulating the chemistry of Shino as I was inspired by this, what Shino represented. It represented, just like you were referring to the vet screen back from World War II, another way of looking at the world, another way of looking at experience. It expanded the way I looked at form, at the way we react to a vessel that we're holding in our hands. And to fast forward, my first experience with Malcolm was teaching, when I was teaching a kiln building workshop in the lower Penland studio. Malcolm was upstairs teaching a Shino experience. And he, by that time, had gotten quite a reputation for developing probably the sexiest glaze to hit the ceramic world in a long time. The leopard skin, brilliant neon flash that you just couldn't get enough of. And he had ratcheted down the view of Shino in the popular vocabulary to the extremely narrow expression of Shino. And upstairs, they had 20 students, maybe some of you listening were in that class. And they were all using Malcolm's porcelain, and out it went to the kiln that was wired up with CO2 analyzers and parameters. It looks like it was being fed intravenously, following a very specific firing protocol. So up we went, the firing came out, and it was all bland, kind of white. Everybody was disappointed. In the trash can, back they went. Porcelain, throwing, back out to the kiln. Kiln opens up, everything's exactly the same. And I thought they were just brilliant pieces coming out. And I said, Malcolm, this is incredible. He said, nothing good. Nothing here is really what we're looking for. Into the dumpster, back they went. This went on for 2 months. And so at the end, I said, so Malcolm, what's your success rate? He said, about 25%. And I said, wow, that's a tough row. And what I was so inspired by was Malcolm's commitment and perseverance to continuing to mine against all odds, the possibility of discovering once again that beauty and that leopard skin carbon trapped surface, that he didn't care what it cost. And I think that's really inspiring, that when you find beauty, you put your root down, you don't worry about commodifying the results, and you put your root down and dig deep to come up with what you hope is there. And I think as much as the glaze inspired his students, his followers, those inspired by the glaze, was his commitment, his perseverance against all odds, and there were many. So fast forward, we finished building the wood kiln, and in went all the pots, and Malcolm's class came down to see the pots coming out of the kiln, and he said, that's a great looking glaze, what's that? And I said, it's Shino. He said, no, I mean that one, it's Shino. And that went on for, the kiln was full of 300 or 400 Shino pots. And there in a nutshell was sort of the elasticity of interpretation, both the dangers and the advantages of ratcheting down the pursuit of excellence to a very, very narrow window. It yields incredible results, and it also allows others of us to realize this vocabulary is much wider than we dreamed of and has a lot to offer us.
That's just a great way to put it. And what I find interesting about your experience, and I can relate to Malcolm's experience, trust me, I just unloaded a kiln yesterday. It was all carbon trap Shino, and I lost about 60% of the kiln, right? So, but on your, with your experience, you're looking for these different characteristics that are perhaps more subtle and more nuanced to, Anagama style wood firing. And, I think it's really interesting, this broad topic or this broad category that has developed, I think, here in America, especially. I don't know if you agree with me there, or if maybe you have something else to add to that.
Well, the only thing I really have to add to it is that reflecting on John's comment about imitating, imitation can be death if that's all you're up to, but we all learn by imitation. If you pick up a guitar and you want to be a musician, you don't come up with an original composition. You play a song that inspires you, that you love, and unless you're a brick the 100th time you play that song, it's going to be yours in so many really subtle, nuanced ways. And I think that's exactly the same with Shino. I think that the more you use it, the more you discover about yourself and about what you're really after. So imitation is important. I don't think any of us learn by coming up with our own original T-bowl. So the pitfalls and the advantages of following somebody else's example are clear to all of us. It's much like I think of in the 60s, British rock stars coming over to play back to us American blues. And they were completely cognizant that they were in danger of exploiting artists that went largely, Black artists that went largely unappreciated here. And so through England, a wider audience in America began to appreciate Black music. And I think the same thing happens with Shino coming from Japan. There's a completely different audience that now is aware of things in Japanese culture that heretofore they never would have heard.
That's a great and interesting metaphor, or, I'm thinking of, translating the music experience and, our pottery experience, and how cultures are constantly sharing ideas and appropriating ideas. And, I think our experience with Shino is certainly an example of that. Jim, did you have something to add? I'm sorry, I think I cut you off.
Sorry, I got a little one here. I kind of wanted to grab onto a little bit of what Kevin said, and if because for me in a lot of my life, like, he's like that guy for me. And I want to give a shout out to, and as part of this, a dear old friend, Clara Pasco, passed away this week. I don't know if you're aware, Kevin, but she was in. What's that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she just passed away this week. She had cancer. I didn't know, but I just heard that the other day. But she was instrumental in making the Noborigama Kiln and Touchstone Center for Crafts happen, and that was where I first met Kevin and was really heavily influenced by Kevin. And I remember you saying those exact words. This was 20 some odd years ago. I was like, struggling with, oh, Kevin, I love your pots, but I don't want to make your pots, and you said those exact words. Hey, look, imitation practice is almost necessary to learn a craft, whether it be the guitar or making pots. But then over time, your own voice will show through. So I always found a lot of comfort in those words and in practicing and trying to learn and trying to do and trying to, seek voice. But so I wanted to grab onto that, Kevin, and say those words that you just said had stuck with me for more than 20 years as well. And then that was where my initial learning about building kilns, Noborigama kilns, from Kevin. So Joe and I, we just started to say that how we're sort of in this next generation where I don't know what it was like to come back from Vietnam or World War II. I heard Lauren mention working with Shinos in the 70s. I was born in 1974. I saw my first Shino glaze probably in the late 90s, which was, I remember in college, I was studying, I learned from Duke Mesnikowski at California, Pennsylvania, and there was this glaze called Gustin Shino, and I didn't know what Gustin was, let alone Shino. I spent this morning looking at Chris Gustin's kiln that was just opened, getting a few pics of those chambers sitting there because that always fascinates me. But that glaze, when put on thick, it was one that would crawl in this brainy fashion. It was this fat white, maybe peach thing, but it would always, people would apply it real thick and it would turn into like a brain type of crawling. And some people really like that. It turned me off. And then when I went to Touchstone, I met artists like Kevin and Dale Huffman, who really influenced me. And I kind of learned what a Shino was, other than this, brainy, crawling, strange surface. Anyway, I just want to throw that in there, given following up on what Kevin said.
I'll have to jump back in and jump on to what Jim just said. We just finished a workshop here, and the last car pulled away about 2 minutes before 5. And the people in the workshop here had all been firing with Jim up in Monocacy. And and had so many kind words to know about Jim, not knowing that I knew him.
Oh, really?
And how it inspired them in firing and looking at work differently. So it just, you get it right and you pass it on and you pass it on. And Jim's doing an amazing job doing that.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. Oh, looks like we lost John. Bummer. I'd like to jump in that, when I first met Kevin, and now I think we're talking about, like the sharing of information. And I know that I was with a group of artists from DC, and we had contacted you, Kevin, and you invited us to your house, and we spent the whole day listening to you teach us about kilns, kiln building, and then you showed us around your kiln. And I just thought that was a really amazing and open suggestion for the next generation. And I really find that, especially in our community, we're really open to sharing our sometimes most intimate secrets, or at least sharing our processes and inviting people in, making sure that, our processes perhaps live on, or maybe we can just help somebody develop their own process. And I always found that as a staple experience for me, especially in how I devote my teaching method to my students, to my own students. So again, I just would like to kind of share that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm also a collector of your pots too. So this is one of several that I use every day. So anyways, I guess staying on this, the education and the dissemination of information, I'd really, and you, Kevin, you were talking about, you just had a workshop, and I know that it was a long weekend, so I really appreciate you taking the time and just jumping in right away. But I find that this new version of community firings, it's like a new ulterior model for education and an important source for the passing of ideas and information. And I guess I'd like to focus in on Jim for this one to start us out. The passing of Shino style recipes and techniques in American diaspora seem to rely on education and community environments like university programs, and now community firings like at Cub Creek or Monocacy River Pottery, and of course at Kevin's workshops at Thai River Pottery. I'm sure you are all been exposed to how other potters are thinking about using Shino glazes and techniques. But Jim, in your vast experience with leading community firings at Monocacy River, could you speak about current tendencies, processes, or innovative techniques that have risen due to this community environment? And perhaps could you also touch on how these types of community firings help the innovation and dissemination of new ideas and techniques? And I know that's a lot to unpack, so.
Yeah, I'll do my best with that. At the community firings, a lot more happens than just firing the kiln. And in our particular ones at Monocacy, we may have up to 20 participants there in one firing. The kiln's over 200 cubic feet. So, and it's 3 chambers. It has a large first chamber that's all wood, most suitable for Shinos. And then the second and third chambers, we do mixtures of salt and soda in. But what I've found with Shino glazes and the different artists that are working with us is that everybody seems to be after something different with it. People love carbon trapping, and of course, the Malcolm style. So I keep on hand for participants to use what I would consider like a red base Shino, we call gold Shino. So it's a red base Shino that gets gold lustre effects. We also keep a red base carbon trap Malcolm Shino. We usually have a white to orange, which Kevin goes back to I use the Shaner formula. That was one of the ones that I love from way back because of the sort of peach and salmon colors that you get. It'll also trap carbon a little bit. And then we have a couple other offshoots of gray types, but we always have a variety of Shinos on hand, and that's always changing based on what works well, what doesn't work well, what people seem to like. But what I've noticed is that different people want something different from each of the Shino glazes. And so when you're firing a kiln in a community atmosphere, when you're sort of, you'd like to make everything happen, but it's just not possible. So that's one way I look at the way people use Shinos. And then the dissemination of information amongst participants
Right. Well,
is...
well, thank you. I'm not getting...
Oh, so anyway, it's just incredible how much happens during the course of one firing of all these different artists interacting with each other, interacting with each other's work, and understanding what they were after, what they got. Is this what you wanted? No. Well, it's beautiful. No, it's not. It's not what I wanted. Sort of going to what Ken was saying about that narrow view of your work. Sometimes what we get isn't what we wanted, but it's beautiful nonetheless. So yeah, that's how I see that. And then for me, I know for some potters and artists, keeping your formulas, keeping information tight to your vest is important. For me, I've always been willing to share all my glazes, the glazes I'm using. For the most part, I didn't make them up. I just try different glazes that are out there and see what's going to work for me. Maybe I make a little adjustment here and there, but I'm less interested in formulating glazes than I am in taking what's there and seeing what's going to happen on my clay, on my pot, in this kiln, in this atmosphere, and then going from there and seeing what's going to, work out. Was there another part to that question?
No, I think that's great.
Did I hit it?
Go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
I had nothing to say.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I thought somebody was trying to speak. Yeah, no, I just, between, John and Kevin's and Jim, you're, always kind of have these community firings. And of course, that's probably out of necessity as well, because and Kevin, you're firing these long wood firings and you probably need the help, right? So, there's these different strategies that are working, but for me, what I'm keying in on is how it's such a great opportunity to share ideas and to share this information. And it's a really, really great way to, it's an ulterior also to, what's the traditional university system as a way to, engage with master potters or to learn and to practice if you're just, trying to learn. So I don't want to talk too much in a circle. I could probably keep going on and on. Lauren, did you have anything you want to add? I know that you fire by yourself, but I wasn't sure about your experience of community firings and how maybe that had led to some of your innovation.
Actually, it had led me to wanting to fire by myself. It's interesting. I think Robin asked a question about the difference between gas and wood firing. And I didn't really understand, particularly I call them the triad, the Tomoku, Celadon, and Shino, until I had built my own wood kiln and started firing with solely wood. Then I was like, oh my God, they can do all this stuff, And I've honed in on Shino because it's so close to, it's clay on the clay body. It's clay with feldspar. And so I can kind of, I can work with it by forming basically I mix it to taste as I wanted. It's kind of a slip. I follow the Shino kind of parameters. And I know my clays. I know what the characteristics of different clays are from all my, from tile 6 to XX Dagger to whatever. And I kind of mix it like I was mixing for paint, for painting, as I feel what is needed for the piece. And I think that my firings, the thing about it is, I've learned so much about Shino by being able to control all the variables myself. And for me, having a long kind of reduction soak in the middle between 1500 Fahrenheit and 2000 Fahrenheit, things happen in that blows my mind, both on the way up and on the way down. And so I could spend my whole life just firing my little kiln and learning just what happens to Shino, to a Shino base, a kind of idea where you have a clay and a feldspar and maybe a melter, either introduced or not, or done by the ash, and what they do in those periods of reduction. And so in a community firing, I never had that kind of control. I never had that kind of voice to say, let's try this, and in a single firing at Cub Creek, I could, if I'm young and I could have done it at Cub Creek, but I, in 2005, basically decided I'm going solo and built a kiln, and now I'm firing solo. So that's about it. Did we lose Joe?
I'm not sure. Lauren, where were you firing before?
So I fired, it's funny. I fired your kiln with John Thies years ago.
The three-chamber one.
Yeah. What? The Noborigama, the three-chamber. And I fired with Mary Barron. And it was all her work, except she'd throw in a piece or two of my work. And I fired with Washington White up in that wonderful kiln that Sven Bear built. And that hooked me, because at Alfred, when I was there, they built a huge kiln, a huge wood fire kiln, but they had this little kiln, this little Bory box kiln. And they built this huge kiln, and it took a village to fire this kiln. But I asked Val years later, I never fired in that little Bory box. And I was like, Val, what was that, a Bory box? I mean, do I remember this correctly? And he goes, yeah. And I said, I want to build a kiln in the city, and everybody's telling me it's a bad idea, but I think that kiln would be a good fit for me, and should I do it? And he was like all for it. He was like, yeah, build that kiln. So I then did 3 years of research. That's another story for another day. And had Donovan Palmquist build that kiln for me, his first worry box. And it's been it's like a relationship. It's a marriage. You get your kiln, and then it takes you your whole life to learn how to get a conversation that you both can, thrive with. And
by the time you figure it out, it's falling down.
Yes. That's it.
I don't know when to jump in here.
Jump in,
John. Jump in.
Okay. Our kiln is we have two large wood-fired kilns. Our kilns have to be fired as a group. Our kilns cannot be fired individually. Our Noborigama kiln goes from 5 to 6 days around the clock. Our Anagama kiln, we fire over 3 days around the clock. And talking a little bit about wood firing as opposed to gas firing, I fire a lot of Shinos in gas, but I fire a lot of them in wood. And the results are totally different. Some Shino glazes react badly to the fly ash, and others work very beautifully with the fly ash that comes in a wood kiln. And so everything, you just have to figure things out. And we do testing. I encourage all of our residents from the day they're here till they leave, testing is important. That's where new things come about. that rejuvenates your enthusiasm. We just had a firing that we just unloaded, and it was just amazing new stuff that gives us all excitement to go on and get ready for the next one. So there isn't any easy answers to this. I know Malcolm fired most of the time in gas, and he had it figured out beautifully. And when I heard him one time, he was talking about that he didn't wood fire because the results were so elusive in gas that he didn't want to add something new. We fire all kinds of kilns. We have soda kilns, we have salt kilns, we have gas kilns, we have electric kilns here, and we don't put a priority or on any one of them. I have seen some of the most beautiful pots in the world come out of electric kilns. And so you have to find the process that marries with your ideas, the glazes that marry to your ideas. And it's as simple as that. I'm sorry I'm jumping in because I don't know when, because I can't hear any of you. But anyway.
John, that's great. You can jump in anytime.
I have a resident here who's very good with computers, and he can't figure it out either. And unfortunately, it worked great yesterday, but not today.
Well, John, jump in anytime you can, and it's fine. But I'd like to jump in if I could, especially about, firing the way that fits your aesthetic. Right? You can read in a book, hey, you can fire a kiln like this, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you get your results. And especially when I'm teaching workshops for carbon trap Shinos, I'm saying this is how I fire to get the results that I am looking for. This can give you like a barometer to then work from. And, going back to Lauren's comment about, the sweet spot, and I guess we're kind of getting into some technical things, and I really like to try and provide the audience with some of our, technical operations if possible. But I can tell you that the sweet spot for color in Shino, most specifically carbon trap Shinos, is I start reducing, between 012 and 08. And I will not stop reducing for the entire firing. And the main sweet spot is between like 08 and 2000 degrees. And if you're not reducing in that area, I find that your color response is going to be very, very weak and very, very washed out. And so I'm the type of person that you throw it in, it's blowing smoke everywhere. I don't even care. I'm looking for like the most solid reduction for the longest period of time. And I kind of associate that with Arakawa. John was talking about the inefficiency of those original Ogama kilns of the Japanese Momoyama. And they were so inefficient that, when they're burning wood, they couldn't climb in temperature. And so these pots were sitting in these really heavily reduced atmospheres for really, really long periods of time. And that's what really starts bringing out these iron-rich colors. So I'll stop there. If anyone else wants to jump in here, I'd appreciate it.
I would jump in and say, from the standpoint of firing, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I've been beginning my reduction cycle as 012 is getting soft, and then just reducing all the way through. And I feel like, and I'd like your, I think I know, but I'd like to hear what you think about this, Joe. Like if you're throughout this heavy reduction cycle, and maybe you've laid on a lot of color in the Shinos and a lot of richness is in there, even though we don't know because it's in the kiln. But if you then let off it too much at a later point in the firing, it can all sort of wash away or burn away. I feel like I've had that happen a few times. I wondered what you thought about that.
I just had that happen to me this week. I had fired a kiln Wednesday, and I was experimenting with my target bricks. My kiln needs target bricks so that I don't cook the bottom, because I I use gas and I have Venturi burners, so I'm relying heavily on natural draft. And so what I pushed my target bricks a little too far back, and I realized that when I started hitting cone 6, that the bottom was just taken off. And in my kiln, there's no way to recover that. And I was firing like deep heavy reduction. So I was thinking, oh man, this is going so great. And then, like I said, I started having this imbalance in temperature variance. And in order to melt all the glazes and not like completely ruin the kiln and my furniture, I had to back the damper off and to allow the top to catch up. And I had to fire in that position the whole way to 10. And I am telling you, I lost tons of color. And there is something about, you know, ending a fire and oxidation, that is one of my like premier don't do's for my Shinos, is to end in any type of oxidation. So I'm in it to win it, as deep a damper position as possible, as heavy as a reduction as possible.
I think 5 minutes at the end can be okay, but anything more, and I think you run that risk. And I was going to say, I mean, you just related with the burners and a situation with temperature imbalance. In the wood kiln, you know, you can have all kinds of variables come up, and suddenly, you know, maybe the richness of the Shinos in there isn't the number one thing right now. Now I'm worried about all the pots in the kiln and maintaining the temperature or raising the temperature the best you can in all the parts of the kiln, and other things start to take precedent. I mean, in the wood kiln, sometimes you really have to back off in order to let it breathe a little bit, and you don't know exactly what might have happened during those periods. So I was going to relate that, but it was interesting how you related it with the burners as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, anytime I'm backing off, I'm really scared, you know, so the longevity and the deeper the damper for me, and I'm really dumb. I will fill an entire kiln with carbon trap Shino, which is like really stupid, but I can't help myself. I just can't. And I have found that, you know, my color response and the surfaces that I'm looking for depends more on my specific gravity and my glaze application, like the actual thickness. Carbon trapped with a thinner glaze application so that I can be in these really, really long, heavy reduction cycles, and it might not fill up my whole kiln or all of my surfaces with total black, right? So
right, or if you're not careful and you get that too thick and it's too heavy, you even get into that mossy green looking situation that I've never liked.
I don't either, but some people do, you know, and that goes to like our own individual characteristics. And that's why I'm always saying, this is how I fire for my work. And, you know, it's more of just like a barometer and, you know, just setting like a stage for people to use my information for their process. And I'm always encouraging people to, you know, use what I have to develop your own and develop, because it might not work in one, your kiln, and two, with the resources that you have, you know, or just your general style, you know, and so I'll back out there. I don't know if Kevin or John or Lauren want to chime in with it.
Yeah, I don't fire a lot of Shino. I'd say 90% of the kiln is then glazed. I use Shino for lining some pots. And I probably have 3% of the pots with a poured Shino in areas. I'm really fascinated with that line of transition between where Shino matures and it interacts with natural ash glaze and bare clay body. To me, that's the magic geography that really kind of takes my breath away. And I agree with what you and Jim are both talking about for the importance of reduction through that temperature range. And I place those few pots in the side stoke area where there's an ember bed 13, 15 inches deep in all 4 side stoke areas, and toward the front. Those areas in the bottom, they never go out of reduction. There's that pulsing reduction radiant heat. And you get crystal buildup in those areas that just kind of take your breath away. So I think it's important to know your kiln, know the surface you're looking for. And Jim brings up a really important point in that when you're firing other people's points, the hierarchy of concerns shifts constantly. You know, when you're firing in Jim's case, maybe 20 people's pots, everybody has a different need, but you better get everybody hot enough and mature enough. And sometimes that comes at the expense of not getting the mossy green, the salmon, whatever it is you want to Shino.
Yeah,
I know I've been chasing this perfect firing, you know, and all the pots are so different that it's like this impossible goal, but yet, you know, we'll keep chasing it.
I have one thing to say though. You guys are performing in it.
The old Bizen kilns. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't.
Go. Well, I wanted to say that you guys are performing.
The old Bizen kilns, from the Bizen kilns, were very crude kilns.
hey, Lauren, why don't you pick it up?
Yes.
The potters, I can't. I'm having difficulty here. The Bizen Potters had very crude kilns, and they found areas of their kilns that it's like what Kevin was saying, there's a geography in your kiln, and there's spots where you're going to get 2 or 3 cones cooler than another spot, and you just have to work with it to find those spots and make glazes that respond to your kiln. You know, the kilns, big wood kilns, especially anagamas like Kevin and I have, are never going to be perfectly even from front to back. You have to orchestrate the firing to relate to the kiln. And so a Shino that may work up in the front at cone 12 may be very bland in the back of the kiln. And maybe one that's really rich in the back of the kiln is going to be way overfired and very gray from too much fly ash in the front. It's a matter of finding those things and working with your kiln. You know, the kilns, you know, my Noborigama is now almost, well, I'm just going to say built it in 1998, I believe it was. And it's still firing it. And so we understand it. We understand exactly what we're going to get. And that's really important. And that's what the Bizen Potters did. They have some beautiful, rich, black, red pieces, and then some that are just the salmon color. So, you know, and they're beautiful. They just knew how to use it.
Lauren, do you want to come back in?
Yes, I just wanted to say that the community firing.
I wish I could hear you guys.
The community firings that you guys are doing is a huge service to all of us. It's democratizing access to wood fire experience. And so people can actually see their work and in a wood kiln, which when I was firing, it was a very difficult thing to get into a kiln and to get your work fired and to see it and to imagine your work. There, you know, there's a heavier discussion going on another channel about women in wood fire and the difficulties women had getting into these kilns. But this is not the case with you guys, and I want to credit you for having provided this access for so long. And I realize how difficult it is. Believe me, I tried community firing my little kiln. So, you know, thank you.
Well, it's really kind of you, Lauren, and but I get more out of it than they do. And I'm fortunate in having a really stable crew over quite a few years. So I don't have the clay discrepancies that, for instance, Jim has, where you might have 20 people and 25 different clay bodies kiln. Most of the crew over time is now using my clay bodies, and they know each other. They know the kiln. I can sleep through the nights. It's really spectacular. And from the get-go, we've had equal number of men and women. It just has shaken out that way, as long with different ages. And I would say, if I had to pick a gender crew, I'd go with all women. It just, they're more attentive. But I can take it on the chin. It doesn't run it's not true for everybody, but I've always been amazed in the early days when I heard women couldn't get on crews. It's bizarre. There's lots of reasons for that, I guess. But having a community built around you who are sympathetic and engaged and invested in the kiln really supports everything that I do too. So it's nice that you see it as service. I don't see it that way. I'm glad that's a consequence.
Our crews at Cub Creek are always changing. So we don't have the consistency that Kevin has. Every year I have 6 new residents that come to work here for a year. Some stay for 2, but most are for a year. So it's always a learning experience for our young people. And I don't think of it so much as a democracy. People come to work at Cub Creek, they come here to learn how we do things. And then they move on to the next program and learn another system. I go in fire sometimes with Chris Guston. I never try to influence the firing. I say, Chris, what do you want me to do? Tell me where to put my pots. It isn't a democracy. These kilns are very, very expensive. They cost a lot of money to operate. And so when if I were going up the fire with Kevin, I would bring my pots and I would just help him do whatever he wanted. But I wouldn't try to dictate the process. And when people come here, they don't dictate the process. We do talk about it. I want everyone to learn why we do it and all the things we do. But again, our crews are always revolving. So it's a little different than what Kevin goes through.
Jim, what's your experience with your community firings there? Like, I know that you're always leading them, but is everything kind of based on what your direction is, or do you get feedback from your participants? Like, how would you describe your kind of hierarchy there?
Okay, I'll go back again to something Kevin said to me more than 20 years ago. It's absolutely vital when you're firing a wood kiln like that one person is understood to be in charge, for lack of a better word, so that when things get muddy, which they sometimes might, ultimately one person can make a decision, and it shouldn't be a problem, right? So I think that that's really important. Now, at the same time, I'll tell you, in my crew, which is mostly women we fire with, there's a few guys, a few of them are here with us now. Sometimes we let Brian Crowe come out, and Greg Holmes is always there. But these guys, I've fired with this group of people, again, like Kevin, for so long that I have a core group of, I'm just going to guess, maybe 10 or 12 people that I could say, 3 or 4 words to and walk away and feel totally comfortable that they're going to, make the right decisions. Or so, yes, I would say that I lead the firings. But the opposite might happen too. I might get a crew, because it's always changing, where I don't have as many really experienced people. And there I'll be a lot more tight on sort of taking that lead. But there are other times where I feel a lot more comfortable saying, you know, what you guys think, go ahead. Yeah, I might make changes here and there, but you know, ultimately I like to make as few changes during the firing as possible and just have the people in there just on a rhythm, and then so everybody can pass the rhythm around. I mean, the ultimate for me is if the firing and the crew seems to be managing itself, you know, and while I may be in charge or whatever, it's everybody's managing themselves because everybody knows what to do and what, you know, we expect how it should look and how the fire should look, when to stoke, how many, how the air should look, whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too that you just mentioned, you know, you try to make as little changes in your firing process as possible. And I totally relate to that. And I find that a lot of times when people are messing up their firings, that they're adjusting too many things too quickly and not allowing the kiln to react to, you know, the change that you've made.
Absolutely.
And when I am making adjustments, you know, I'm making very small adjustments, and then I'm waiting for the draft to find itself and to work its way through and to realize, you know, what that change has done before then I make another decision. And, you know, and I'm firing gas, but, you know, my thermodynamics are similar in that I'm relying on natural draft. You know, I don't have blowers, right? So I think it's similar to what you guys are experiencing as well. So Jim, it looks like you have something to respond with.
I was going to say, yeah, it's the same. It's no different in a gas kiln or a wood kiln. If you get caught in that trap of making all these changes and then pretty soon you don't know what you did. I mean, I've definitely done that in kilns before. You know, I've fired enough times to have had ones go awry. But if I can get through a firing and I made, you know, 2, 3, 4 changes to the atmosphere or whatever throughout the whole thing, I usually walk away feeling pretty good about it. Whereas if I found myself in this making these changes or trying to force the kiln to do something it might not want to do, then I sometimes walk away thinking, geez, I really don't know exactly what I did during that firing. You know, I feel less confident how it might come out.
Yeah, I can completely relate. Kevin,
well,
go ahead, John.
I think that the one thing that I try to encourage and tell everyone is we are all learning this. You know, even I started wood firing with Ruth McKinley in 1963. I built my first wood kiln in 1967. And I am still learning. Every time I fire, I make adjustments. I find new things. I find new spots in the kiln. We're always experiencing new things. That's what's beautiful about wood firing. And also with Shino glazes, they respond so much to the atmosphere, the fly ash, and all the things that are going through, the level of oxidation and reduction, all the factors, and it's a constant learning process. And that's what keeps me going. I'm 83 years old and I'm still learning and I'm still working every day.
John, I know John can't hear, but
anyway,
that just made me think of something I wanted to be sure to say about like when I started to enjoy Shino glazes way early on, was that here was this glaze that responded directly to what the fire had done. And that idea of the work I was making or whatever I was making actually responding to the fire and actually having a record of what the fire had done was what set me off about Shino glaze. And then subsequently, probably a year later or so, really took my socks off when I learned about wood firing with Kevin. And I was like, whoa, these pots are going to like look like what the fire did to them. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there on the back what John had just said, you know, and it's been a constant source of learning ever since.
Yeah, and Jim, you just rewrote my artist statement. that's like everything that I think about. And I guess, you know, there's one thing that I did want to kind of highlight, and I want to stay on this topic. And you know, I had listed in my little outline here that I feel like there's 3 subcategories of Shino in America. One's like the traditional glazing of like, you know, the Warren McKenzie styles. Then there's the carbon trap. And then there's this aesthetic that I think is being developed by the wood firing community, which is you guys. And I really want to focus in on this to kind of end and also highlight some work from the exhibition. So I might share my screen when I can. But I'm kind of losing my place here. I guess what I'm really interested in, and Lauren and Kevin, I think this is really obvious in your work. And Kevin, I might start with you in this, in that you guys are kind of using these like Shino style slips or glazes. And then you're really encouraging the interaction and the engagement of the firing process and the ash to kind of land on there and mix and meld with those surfaces. And they kind of recreate these entirely new surfaces. And I you know, that's just kind of my interpretation when I'm looking at your work. And I was just wondering, you know, if you could maybe take us through, you know, what you're thinking about as far as, you know, those slips, the chemistry, how that relates to like light and dark clay bodies, you know, just, and then also how you're using the firing as this kind of third element to create these surfaces. And sorry, go ahead.
I was asking Lauren how she approached that.
Mine is, I create the slips on the fly. So basically I start out thinking about a body of work and the imagery I want to make, and I mix. I studied with Val too, glaze chemistry, and at the time I studied with him, he was like a cup of this, a cup of that. Anyway, his point was understand your materials and you can make a glaze. And so I basically mix based on how I use this is very good. I use a high iron clay body. I mix Stancil's clay, which is a local clay body, a clay that we all can dig. Well, some people can dig. I've run out of Stancil's, but it's very high in iron, but it's very refractory as my base clay body mixed with a commercial clay body. And then these surfaces are just really a kaolin or a porcelain mixed with a feldspar, not most of the time Nefsai, and at different proportions. And depending on the clay, in this case, I think it's tile 6. And that, you know, and how I place it in the kiln depends on how much of the volatilized wood ash. I'm not interested in a lot of wood ash melting and forming its own glaze. I'm interested in the volatile salts that are in the air in a firing that land on the pots and create a covering, a sheen, a kind of subtle sealing of this slip to the clay. So basically, it's clay body, clay slip, which is mostly a kind of Shino, and then the atmosphere of the kiln and how I control that. And that's why I really needed my own kiln to do this kind of playing around. You see, the other thing about it that you're seeing from these pictures is that I pull iron from the clay body out to the surface with reduction cooling. And that in itself is like the Terra Sig of our time. We're doing research now about it. All the people who are doing reduction cooling are starting to share their knowledge about it. You can see these iron pockets where it's pulled from the clay body through the slip into the surface and creates these iron spots. But that's the Stancil's clay because it's very high iron. Or I can work with another high iron clay body. It's very simple. It's very direct. It's very improvisational. And because I'm doing a whole load of my work, I don't have to worry if I ruin a load. But so far, I told everybody the last firing, I did a day, a shelf a day loading. That's how I've slowed it all down to try to really think about how the flame is going to move through the kiln and what images what do I want to pull forward and push back. It's very like printmaking for me. I was an etcher for years, and I'm trying to pull the whites out. I'm trying to really make the darks punch, and talk about what it feels like to live in my environment today. That's it. It's pretty basic. This is what's it. That piece was what was in the show.
Kevin, I'm, oops. There we go. Sorry. I guess I pulled up your images, and maybe you could just kind of discuss what you're thinking about with with these particular pieces. These are the works that are in the show right now. And, you know, maybe you could just comment on your process and what you were thinking about in the creation of these vessels. Oh, hey.
You're on mute.
There you go. Sorry, Kevin. I think I accidentally muted you. I did not try that. I apologize.
You're still muted.
Hey, how about now?
Yeah, you're good. Sorry about that. That was my fault.
It's okay, you've got a real dinosaur here, and my wife Linda showed the mute button before she took off. So anyway, this is I've never done any hand building outside of some slab tray work, and this is a throne piece without a bottom. It's about 2 feet tall, and it's altered dramatically, so it's fairly narrow, and with a hand built top and neck. And these are made to fit along the side of the kiln, along the firebox, where the arch comes down to the supporting horizontal wall, and it just fits in between the shelf and the top of the arch. It was a dead space that I had in the kiln that had filled up with smaller things, never so successfully. So that's the origin of this particular form. And I've taken Shino and poured it along with the sharp edge of the piece, and you can see it sort of moving from left to right. And what I'm looking for in pots in general is when they come out, I want people to hold them and go, man, this was on fire. And the Shino sort of supports that, echoes that, and makes that combustion experience more complex. And so pieces are never wholly coated with Shino glaze. And I use Chuck Hines Shino, by the way. It's called Chuck Hines Wood Shino. And I only use that glaze. Over the years past, I've tried a lot of different glazes. They never seem to make much difference. I'll say it's Chuck's is really stable. It's a low soda ash recipe. I can't remember it. If you look online, you'll find Hines Shino, and it's if you're interested in using it. And Chuck was here one time after leaving John Jessamine's studio. We were visiting and talking. He said, hey, I want to get this tea bowl. I love the Shino on it. I said, yeah, well, it's Hines Shino. It's your Shino. And he said, I don't know how my name got stuck on a bucket of Shino. I never came up with that glaze. And probably all of you know that. I was back at Touchstone some years ago firing, and I saw a big bucket with Kevin Shino on it. And I told whoever the studio tech was that's not my Shino. Take my name off of it. It's actually Hines Shino. And you can see how confusing the legacy of ownership and the confusing of ownership over glazes go. But anyway, I'm looking for pieces that will be inspired by the necessity of the architecture of the kiln and how it will support distribution of heat and how it will expose the violence of the flame on the pots. By the way, Lauren, I love your surfaces. Beautiful. This is the backside of that piece.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. So as we all know and love about wood firing, you can display a piece at home, and in 3 months, give it a quarter turn, and you've got a different visual experience.
Yeah, what I love about this plot is that you see all of these different characteristics of Shino. You know, on you know, the first side where it's white, you kind of get, you know, obviously those feldspar whites, and it's kind of really opaque. And on this side, it's just really integrated with the clay body, and those irons and like crystallization starts to occur. It looks like for me, and maybe I can blow it up. There we go. Yeah. So like all of these like, you know, extra textures that begin to occur. And what are these specks? Is that like from the ash itself?
Yes,
That's
yes.
kind of working with the iron? Yeah. Could you just go into that a little bit?
Yes, yeah. It depends how, you know, exactly where the piece is and what the draft does. But most of the time, pieces in the location that this was placed will express those sort of pockets of ash, making more complex the Shino reduced side of the pot. By the way, in case anybody's interested in that clay body, it is Laguna makes a body up for me that is 2 parts B-mix wood and 1 part 860. It's tight enough body to support ash deposition and on the surface, and enough tooth that it can take the violence of the second stack in the kiln without cracking.
Sorry, I'm trying to load images. My apologies there. Oops, and I have to unmute myself. Or no, I'm unmuted. Okay, very good. I'm doing a lot of things here. I guess the fact that we kind of started late, I really want to give all the panelists an opportunity to kind of talk about their work. So if it's okay, Robin, we'll just take an extra like 5-10 minutes or so for Jim and John to kind of comment.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, so then perhaps I'll move on to Jim. Let me share my screen. Hold on, I'm sorry, apologize guys. This, I believe, is your pot in the exhibition right here. Is that correct, Jim?
Yep, it is.
Yeah, well, maybe you could just talk about this a little bit and just, you know, maybe talk about your aesthetics, what you were trying to do, what you find so interesting about this, why this was so successful for you.
Yeah, this pot's, I mean, one of the things in my pots is they tend to be simple, on the simple side. So this is sort of the expression of a simple cylinder. One of the things I'll never forget my first teacher saying was, which is Duke Mesnikowski, saying, never underestimate the beauty of a simple cylinder. And I've always kind of kept that in my mind. And if any of you guys that are familiar with my coffee mug or some of the other pots, it's an expression of just a simple cylinder. And that's what this is too. This is a bucket, either utensil bucket, ice bucket, however when you look, you know, you want to look at it. It is, I think it's gold Shino on the inside. And then I think there is the whiter kind of Shaner type Shino on the outside, which is that lower soda ash, and it's poured across. It's not quite as haphazard as it looks. The Shino was poured on, and then any unwanted dripping and stuff that happened, I actually carefully wiped away to leave this sort of lateral expression, this just lateral image, you know, I guess kind of similar to what Kevin's was too. I'd like to ask Kevin if he had wiped away any of the glaze from that, or if it had just happened that way. But this one did not just happen that way. Anything that I didn't want was washed away. And then it's up on the ash pretty good. It's, other than the Shino, is raw clay. And if you haven't seen this piece, it's medium size. It was probably about 15 pounds of clay, maybe something like that. It may be 12 by 12 inches or so. But yeah, just a functional expression of a cylinder.
Yeah, I was really fascinated by this piece. I really like, because I saw the work that you had dropped off for sale. And those to me seem to be like, you know, more traditional Shinos, like a Warren McKenzie style, right? And when I saw this, I was just like, man, there's just so much going on here. And again, it kind of goes to my point of this kind of American integration of the firing process to really help, you know, add more complexity and depth to the Shino surfaces. And you know, these stark contrasts, I'm a really big contrast fan. So this pot really, really reached out to me. I think this is really awesome.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I guess maybe I could move on to, sorry, I'm figuring out how to use this website. I have a couple of your other images. Let me see, like here, this one. I was really interested in this. This is an absolutely beautiful piece, and I love the integration with the ash. And it just seems really simple and almost like carbon trap-esque because of all of these crystals and things that grow with the, with the carbon trapping. Could you
It
just?
is, yeah. It was actually sitting
Oh.
right behind me right now. I've got it right here.
How perfect is that? Maybe you could discuss this a little bit too.
Yeah, this has the surface which a lot of folks are using now too at our kiln, which is a Shino Slip. And this one was fired on shells on its side, right up, bottom row, right up on the bag wall in wood. So this was practically in the coals this is what Kevin was talking about earlier, this intense reduction that this pot could not escape from. And in the case of this one, there's crystal growth on it. You get this blue-gray look, which is only found in that area of really intense reduction. If you see the sort of other side of this pot, there's more. It's backwards. So if you look at the other side, it's got more of this sort of blue-gray where it was really right up on the fire, as well as some crystal effects and things. And obviously, this is all the fire acting on which is a Shino Slip in this case. Which, if anybody's not familiar with the Shino Slip, it is just like a Shino glaze, but it's got about 25% more clay to it. So it has more of a slip clay surface to it, but it's just real sensitive to flashing. They flash beautifully. It's a real nice surface. I think you could even get some nice orange colors from it in a gas kiln. It's worth a try. Anyway, so that's what that bottle is. And it's it's probably about a 12 or 14 inch bottle. It's a softly paddled square. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I mean, beautiful pot, a lot of complexity. And I think this pot is a really, kind of intermediary between, what wood firing potters are doing and then what I'm doing, which is like, carbon trap specifically, and those types of Shinos. And I love this piece, man. So I might have to come over to your house and get it from you.
All right, it's getting here.
So I guess, John, we can move on to yours. I lost its place. Sorry about that. And I apologize to everyone. Here we go. This is kind of like a real consistent, vessel form that I've seen your work. I really love these pieces. They're really free. They're expressionistic. And maybe you could just talk about, your philosophy and what you're doing in your kiln in achieving some of these surfaces.
All righty. I will try to be brief. Are you here? I will try to be. This is a series. I believe this is the piece in the show, is it not? Is this the piece that's in the exhibit? Yeah. Okay, because I have another one that's I have that's it's on its way to China. That's the one I sent you the image of. But this is a white stoneware piece put together. It's about 17 inches tall, 15 inches wide. It's part of a series that I've been working on for a couple of years. And I've been doing them in white stoneware as this one is. And this is then lightly, what I do once the piece is bisque fired, I begin painting oxides into all of the interstices and then spraying it. And this one was sprayed with a Shino, one of John Ballesteri's Shinos. It's I call it a porcelain Shino because it works best on white clays and porcelain. And it's just, I don't know what to say other than that. It's just a drum vase. I make a bunch of them. I make them all different. I'm working on some now that are going to be soda fired and with really black clays. So it just, I don't know what else to say. It's just one of my pieces.
So I believe this is one of the pieces that you were just talking about. And
Oh, this is another, all right, this is one of I think I sent you 2 T-balls, but this is one that's of glaze. I developed a crackling Shino. And this T-ball is fired 3 times. It's bisque fired, glazed, bisque fired again, and after the second bisque firing, I rub oxides in all the crackle, and then I refired in a wood kiln. And it's kind of something I've come up with that I kind of think it's got a lot of potential. So I'm going to probably work on those for a bit. And this is another one with a similar type of glaze. I love glazes that have a lot of action. Crawly, crackly, pinholey glazes are my favorite. And this is a glaze. This is a crackly glaze, again fired 3 times. And the white that's on this is another Shino. This is a more typical of an old Japanese Shino in that it's almost all feldspar on the white. But I kind of, it's kind of way I go. I mean, I like a lot of action in my work. Like glazes that do a lot of crusty things. I have also a group of Shinos that are called center Shinos. And some of the people I've seen calling them Mino Shinos, which is inaccurate. They were never fired in Mino. They were never developed in Mino, but they're very high alumina Shinos that do not form a shine. They got very crusty. And I have 4 formulas of those that I've been working on that are very nice. They pick up a lot of color because they don't form a real glaze. There's no soda ash in them at all. And as a matter of fact, most of my glazes, I don't put soda ash in. Soda ash is not a necessity for Shinos. Most of the original Shinos did not have soda ash in them. And so because the soda ash is important if you're doing carbon trapping, but if you're not doing carbon trapping, it's not essential. So it's just the way I go.
Yeah, I would say that if you're not carbon trapped,
but the white again is just, I think that one is just NFSI, maybe about 90% with maybe 10% EPK, just so it holds together. It gets deflocculated well, and then I just put it on with my fingers. And it's a kind of a contrast to the real crawly, pinholey surfaces that I like.
Yeah, your work is really...
I don't really like talking about my work, as you can probably tell.
Okay, well, then we'll stop. I really love...
It speaks for itself.
Yeah. I really love your textures. They're full of depth. And I would also agree that if you're not firing for carbon trap Shino, you probably don't want soda ash in your glaze, because that just creates all sorts of problems, being insoluble and all that stuff. So, well, I guess what I will do is, I guess I want to take the opportunity to just highlight a couple of winners. These are my 2 pieces in the exhibition. But, there's a couple of pieces that I want to highlight if it's going to be my turn. And I guess if I'm the moderator, I can take that opportunity. But this piece is just crazy. I'm really fascinated by this piece. It seems like it's all feldspar without hardly any clay in it. which I think is really interesting. And it's like a really icy type of Shino. And I was really, really, amazed at some of these with this particular surface and the intense crazing. I think the depth of that really demonstrates what feldspar does without clay. So I think that's a really interesting, obvious characteristic of that material. And I think that's why I'm really attracted to that one. There's also,
Can you,
go ahead.
Joe, who made that piece? Who made that piece?
Sorry, I have that up. Hold on one second. Yeah, the names aren't on this, and I do apologize. I just have to quickly find it. Carrie Nathanson. Thank you, Jim, for bringing that out. Carrie Nathanson. She actually has the first two. These are both of her pots, and I just think they're both just beautiful. I would also like to highlight, I'm a big fan of Lee Love. Where's his pot? I think he brings out some of the softness. Where is that? I apologize. There we go. I think his pots are really interesting because they kind of follow along like what Warren McKenzie had brought to the conversation and kind of introduced a lot of people in America too. And I'm just a really big fan of kind of the subtlety and the depth that Shino can create by, the subtleties of iron and how iron kind of comes through that really thick surface. And also the integration of the clay body and how they just kind of marry and build this kind of complexity, even though it's really, really simple. This pot is really crazy too. I was really fascinated by that. So, and I'm a Lee Love fan, so I can't help but have this part of my collection as well. So I guess I'm honored I was able to acquire that. So I know that we're kind of running long here, and I guess we might want to hand it back. I'm not sure if any of the panelists have anything they'd like to say ending. I would just like to end with, I really appreciate the opportunity to be the moderator and to kind of lead the conversation and to talk about all of this with you guys. There's just such a wealth of knowledge. And I'm just really excited to be a part of this project. And I also have to give an extra shout out to John for hanging in there with these incredible technical difficulties. I think you did a fantastic job. So I don't know.
You did a great job.
Thanks. And I don't know if anyone else has anything to say. If you do, just shout it out.
I have one quick thing to say. When all of the Zoom, this is like my first Zoom thing, when I've seen all these pictures, I'm seeing people, Deborah and Shannon and Rick Schoonover and so many people that I recognize there. I just wish I'd give you a big pandemic hug. It's a reminder of how exciting and precious this community that we all share is. It's an honor to be part of it with all of you.
I ditto that.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for having me be a part of this. It's really an honor. And yeah, Kevin, it's great to connect with everybody and see all these.
I also thank Robin and Joe. Great job.
May I say something as an observer?
Sure.
Well, no one has addressed the fact that Shinos can be overglazed, and that is primarily my focus. I overglaze almost all of my Shinos. I think Lauren probably would attest to that, and so would Kevin. And I find that I like the stability, the toughness of the Shino when I use other glazes over it.
Okay, could you just identify yourself? We
Oh,
can't-
I apologize. My name is Reed Schoonover. I live in Clintonville, Wisconsin.
Oh,
And I have one other quick question, and that is, have any American Shinos gone back across the pond and are being used in Asia, specifically Japan?
as far as my knowledge, I haven't really seen, you know, like the introduction of like carbon trap Shinos. I've only just started following a lot of Japanese galleries and stuff on Instagram. And, you know, I see a lot of the Japanese pots that I'm aware of as being kind of more traditional. And perhaps following the lines of our current wood firers now, where they're integrating the wood firing process with the surfaces. But you know, with now with social media and Instagram, and now I can start following all this stuff. Maybe I can answer that question a little bit better in like a year. I don't know if anyone else has something to add to that conversation.
My name is not completely there on TV, Davis. I've been working for 3 years with Shoji Satake. I don't know, you probably know his name. He runs the ceramic program at the College of Art and Design at West Virginia University in Morgantown.
Yep.
He travels internationally. My immediate connection with him has been overseeing a 3-year project honoring Malcolm's life and legacy, which will end next year with an exhibition of his work in Morgantown at the Art Museum at the university. But to your question, I see Shoji and he travels, and I think I can say this okay. He travels, and he went recently, within the last year, to the Mino and Sito kilns. And he said he had this amazing conversation with a master Shino potter there, who said that they were very, very interested in following what's happening in America with American Shino. And he said he even knew Malcolm's name. I said, yeah, but maybe he did. And who knows who else. And so there is things going on. This exhibition will include a catalog with, I think, with definitely some international writers from Shoji's travels. And he's doing several level things, research from Malcolm's, like 6 boxes of thousands of 3x5 cards of Shino recipes, which is going to be put online within the next 6 to 8 months, I think. You might want to watch for that also. So there's a little bit of one final thing. The master potter, Shino in Japan, said this very interesting thing to Shoji. He thought, and I do too, that he thought that their tradition, which is, I don't need to, you know more about that than I do, how strong that is, he felt was holding their creativity back. And hence the joy of what's going on here, and what you're doing. And finally, I'm so glad to meet some of you. I wanted to meet you at the opening we didn't have because of COVID, but I just want to say congratulations to everybody that we pulled off this exhibition in Sandy Spring, Maryland, in the middle of COVID, 19, 20, 21. And I'm so happy to see all your faces. Kevin Crowe, I especially want to talk to you about that Finland summer. I have stories from that I heard. He loved being there with you. But anyway, that's many, many comments, but I think they're all important. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Judy.
Yeah.
Thanks to you. It's a beautiful
Hey, Joe.
exhibition.
Yeah, it is. I'm surprised.
Hey, Joe.
Yes.
Joe Hicks.
Yes.
This is Greg. If any of the folks in the show need a high-res image of their work, they can contact me directly since I photographed the show.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. And I was using your images in the presentation. So we definitely want to give credit to Greg Holmes, featured potter and
Well,
photographer.
Are we going to get that online, Greg? Is it going online?
We shot, you'd have to ask Robin about that,
Yeah.
but I
We're working on
volunteered to
that.
photograph everybody's work in the show. And if people need the high-res image of their work, they can contact me directly, because I did not send super high images over to, they didn't need that for say an online sale or something. So if they need it, they can just contact me.
Yeah, we are working on that, and we hope within 1 or 2 weeks, at least for the last month of the show, which of course goes on through September 5th, that we will have an online gallery, and we are using Greg's beautiful, beautiful photographs. So thank you.
Yeah, my work never looks so good on screen, I got to be honest. I'd also like to thank Judy for your comments there. I would love to meet you face to face, and I just really appreciate your involvement in this. You know, your husband was a mentor. His work had put me down a path that's been a lifelong journey so far. So I just really appreciate all that and all the work that you're doing to preserve his legacy. And again, your participation, and also the plug for West Virginia's fantastic program and what they're doing to document and keep all of Malcolm's work. So just thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
All his papers are there, and my collection of his best 20 or 20% or 25% that work, it will be there at the museum and in their permanent collection. That's where, because he worked there mostly. And that's his best
I'm about done here. I think they're just closing now.
Yeah, I guess we should probably close this up, and I'll just hand it back to Robin or
Daria.
Daria, sorry, pardon me. Daria, I'll hand it back to you. And again, from all the artists and to everyone who's coming, including from Wisconsin, that is awesome. Thank you for showing up. And I'm loving the fact that we've reached so many people. And I do know that this will be posted on YouTube. And so I think if you revisit Sandy Springs' website, there will probably be a link somewhere. And I don't have that information yet, but just look for that in the future. So thank you so much, everybody. And thanks for coming and listening to us talk. I really appreciate it.